I just love ecology.
Hi Alex, welcome to our virtual biology camp. Today we're going to be focusing on ecology. Yes, that's right Alex. Ecology is the study of interactions between organisms and their environment. As we just stated, ecology is the study of the interactions between organisms and their environment. In other words, it is the interactions that exist between living and non-living things within an environment. Not that type of non-living, Alex. Organisms interact with their environment, which consists of biotic and abiotic factors. If you remember from our previous lectures, all living things share common characteristics, which classifies them as living, and we refer to these organisms as biotic. As for all other things that are not considered to be living, in other words, non-living, such as water, soil, rocks, etc., are all known as abiotic. Okay, so moving on, Alex. As we mentioned before, ecology is the study of interactions within an environment, specifically of the interactions seen between organisms as well as with the abiotic components of their environment. Basically, organisms don't live in isolation. They are constantly interacting with other organisms, and ecologists study these interactions at different levels, ranging from the organism level to the biosphere level. Remember from our previous lectures that we identified an organism as a living thing. Yes, Alex, that's correct. Cells make up tissues, which make up organs, which make up organ systems, and ultimately make up an organism. We're going to be focusing on the levels that follow the organism level. For instance, the next level is referred to as a population, which is made up of all the organisms of a certain species that live in the same area at the same time. Yes, Alex, you're right. All of the lions living in the same area, like Pride Rock from The Lion King, would be a perfect example of a population. Now, the level that follows is called a community, which is made up of all the populations that inhabit that same area at the same time. Yes, that's right, Alex. If we look at all the different populations of grasses, zebras, hippos, mice, insects, bacteria, etc., that live in the same area, such as the Pride Lands from The Lion King, this would be a perfect example of a community. Now, the next level that follows is called an ecosystem, which is made up of all the communities in an area and the non-living parts of that environment. Yes, Alex, all of the communities found in the African savanna, like those seen in The Lion King, would be a perfect example, which basically includes all the plants that grow in the savanna, the soil in which the plants grow, the water they absorb through their roots, the air which they get carbon dioxide and release oxygen, as well as the animals that inhabit it. Now, lastly, the biosphere, which is basically all the combined ecosystems of the planet in which all life exists, including land, water, and air. Now, we keep mentioning that organisms interact with one another as well as their environment, but what type of interactions are we talking about? No, Alex, those aren't exactly the type of interactions I'm talking about. Basically, there are three major types of interactions among organisms that we're going to be focusing on: predation, competition, and symbiosis. Okay, let's first focus on predation, which is an interaction in which one organism kills and eats another. Basically, the organism that gets the food is known as the predator, and the organism that is killed and eaten is the prey. Yes, Alex, I guess you're right. In The Lion King, when Scar is about to eat the little mouse, it would be a good example of predation, in which Scar is the predator and the mouse is the prey. Now, through natural selection, predators with beneficial adaptations are able to survive, and then they produce predators that are very efficient in predation based on these adaptations, such as fangs, claws, poison, stingers, sharp teeth, and some even have developed sharp senses. Not exactly, Alex. Some predators just have a higher control of their sense of smell, eyesight, etc. I guess if that helps you remember it. Anyways, it's like how eagles have great eyesight or how bears have a great sense of smell, and there's even some animals that can detect heat or vibrations. Now, all of these help them be better predators. Yes, Alex, good point. Some prey have developed certain adaptations which help them be better equipped to avoid these predators. Yeah, I guess the zebras managing to avoid the annoying hyenas from the lion guard with their panic and run attitude does help. But in nature, zebras, as so many other preys, have developed many beneficial adaptations, such as long, strong legs, which allows them to outrun many of their predators. Or, take the zebras for instance. Their stripes help them get lost in the herd, making it more difficult for predators to target one individual. Yes, Alex, you're right. Zebras, as well as many other animals, have strong legs, which provides them a great defensive tool if needed by providing a strong kick, which can possibly injure or kill a predator in close range. Good question, Alex. There are many other adaptations that can help prey avoid being captured and eaten, such as using camouflage to avoid detection, advertising their poisons with bright warning colors. Some animals even resort to mimicry. No, Alex, not that form of imitating. Some animals will use this form of deception as a means of defense against being eaten. There are different forms of mimicry, such as when an animal looks like a harmful or poisonous organism when in fact they're actually harmless, or like how some animals have parts of their body that look like other parts of their body in order to throw off their predator and have enough time to escape. Just keep in mind that predators can also exhibit these same forms of beneficial adaptations in order to trick and capture their prey. For instance, take the snake as an example. Predators may also use camouflage to hide from their prey. Yes, Alex, that's right. Organisms with the most beneficial adaptations that make them the most suited for their environment tend to survive, which leads to what we refer to as natural selection. Okay, so now let's look at a second type of interaction that's seen among organisms, which is referred to as competition. No, not those type of competitions, Alex. Competition in ecology refers to organisms competing for resources to ensure their survival, which often occurs when organisms of the same or different species attempt to use the same ecological resource in the same place at the same time. Which means that when organisms are competing for the same resource, there's often a winner which thrives in the environment and a loser which fails to survive, often referred to as the competitive exclusion principle. No, Alex, not those type of resources. In ecology, resources refers to anything that is required for life, such as food, shelter, water, light, nesting sites, and even space to grow. For the most part, Alex, organisms do work together, such as staying in herds or packs. However, as the population of the species increases, the availability of resources decreases. I guess that's a good way of seeing it. As a family grows, so does their needs, which means less for everyone to go around. And this is exactly when competition intensifies for limited resources. In your case, bathroom time. So let's take a look at this graph illustrating the population of deer. What does it tell you? Yes, Alex, it does seem that deer population is increasing. However, it just appears to be experiencing exponential growth. However, populations can't continue to grow exponentially for a very long time. Eventually, the population will reach its limit of individuals for that environment's resources, and as the resources become more scarce and waste accumulates, this leads to the growth of the population to slow or stop completely. Well, as we mentioned before, the more members in a group, the more competition that is intensifying, and food becomes more and more scarce. Water may also become problematic, in which there will be water shortages. Yeah, you're right, Alex. The more individuals, the bigger the mess, which means the bigger the population, the more waste that accumulate, which can actually lead to an increase in diseases and poor health. Now, this also further decreases space availability for the population. So, what do you think will eventually happen to the population once it reaches their carrying capacity? Yes, you're right. When the population exceeds the carrying capacity of that environment, many members of the population will die or starve due to all of these limiting factors, causing the population size to drop below carrying capacity. Yeah, I guess that's one way of seeing it, as nature's way of finding a balance and maintaining the population in check, which is why the size of the population will often fluctuate above and below carrying capacity of the environment. Yes, Alex, great observation. Predators may be attracted to rising prey populations, which actually helps regulate the prey population as well. No, Alex, that's not exactly how it works. Let's say that the prey populations of rabbits is very high. Then that means that there's a lot of food availability for predators such as wolves. This will lead to an increase in wolf population and a decrease in prey population. But let's say that the predator population continues to grow and ends up growing too large that then there isn't enough prey to support it, which means that the population will reach its carrying capacity and some predators will die, resulting in a decrease of the population. How do you think that this is going to affect the prey population? Yes, Alex, you're right. This will give the prey population an opportunity to once again thrive, because if the numbers of predators decreases, then less prey will be hunted, resulting in an increase in the prey population. Yes, Alex, you're correct. This illustrates the strong relationship between predator and prey, which keeps the numbers of both populations stable despite their varying numbers. Overall, organisms get everything they need, in other words, resources for survival from their ecosystems such as food, water, air, and even living space. On to our next type, which is called symbiosis. Symbiosis is an interdependent relationship between two organisms that live together, either temporarily or for a longer time, and at least one organism benefits from the relationship. Now, there are three types of symbiotic relationships: mutualism, commensalism, and parasitism. Let's first start with mutualism, which is a living arrangement in which both species benefit. Yes, Alex, that's correct. The tick bird, also known as the oxpecker bird, and the rhino from the lion guard would be a good example in which the bird eats the ticks and other parasites that live on the skin of rhinos and provides them with food. Now, the rhinos in return receive pest control. Here's another example that you might not be that familiar with, which is called lichen, and it actually looks a lot like a plant, but it's actually two organisms living together: fungus and algae. Now, both organisms benefit from this living arrangement because the fungus protects the algae and produces carbon dioxide, which the algae needs for photosynthesis. Now, the algae produces sugars and oxygen, which the fungus uses. You usually find lichen growing on rocks and areas that lack soil. I guess that's a good way of remembering it, Alex. Okay, the next type of symbiotic relationship is commensalism, in which one organism benefits in the form of shelter, transportation, defense, or food, and the other organism in the relationship is neither helped nor harmed. I think that you mean the remora fish, Alex, which is found near a shark's belly, so that when the sharks eat, the remora fish can eat scraps of food left, and the shark doesn't get helped nor harmed by the fish. Yes, Alex, great example. Egrets like Ono and his flock tend to develop a commensalistic relationship with elephants, cattle, zebras, and other large animals, which cause insects to fly around when the animals walk by or graze. Now, as insects fly around trying to frantically move out of the way, the egrets are waiting close by to feed on the insect feast, while the large animals aren't affected at all. Lastly, parasitism. This is another symbiotic relationship in which one organism benefits while the other organism is harmed. Now, the organism that benefits is called the parasite, which lives on or in another organism called the host. Now, the parasite benefits because it gets nourishment and shelter from the host. On the other hand, the host gets harmed. I guess if that helps you remember it, but I was thinking more along the lines of tapeworms, which are parasites that live in the bodies of humans and other animals, and they feed on their bodily fluids. Now, they often also cause diseases to their host. Yes, Alex, that's why it's important to maintain your pets flea and tick free. Not only are these parasites harming their host, in this case your dog, but they can also jump to the nearest host, such as you. Okay, so overall, the three symbiotic relationships include mutualism, in which both organisms benefit, commensalism, in which one organism benefits and the other doesn't care, and lastly, parasitism, in which one organism benefits and the other one gets harmed. Ecologists study interactions among biotic and abiotic components of an ecosystem so that they can be able to identify how a change in any one of them may affect other components of the ecosystem. However, in order to learn about individual organisms, ecologists must first study their habitat, as well as their general behavior, daily movements, and feeding habits. I guess that's a good way to remember what a habitat is. As we mentioned before, a habitat is basically the location where organisms naturally live and find their resources for survival. Good question, Alex. As we mentioned before, many species might live in the same area. Basically, they might share the same habitat, but they do not necessarily have the same niche. A species' niche is basically its role or job in the ecosystem, based on a set of conditions, resources, and interactions that it needs to survive. Their niche also includes how it affects the flow of energy based on its food consumption, as well as acting as a food source for other organisms. No, Alex, we're actually talking about how all organisms living on Earth need energy to carry out life processes such as growth, movement, and reproduction. Now, do you happen to know where the ultimate source of energy is coming from? The sun is the main source of this energy. How is this energy harvested? Well, not exactly, Alex, but I guess you could say that plants are nature's solar panels, which obtain energy from the sun and store in chemical bonds of glucose through a process known as photosynthesis. Now, these autotrophic organisms are often referred to as producers. Good question, Alex. No, there are actually a few other producers, such as bacteria, which do not use sunlight to make their food. Instead, they obtain their energy from chemicals such as hydrogen sulfide through a process known as chemosynthesis. But for the most part, most producers are photosynthetic organisms, which means that they must use the sun's energy as a way to make food in the form of glucose. What do you mean, Alex? I'm not sure what to say about that, but if it helps you remember it, sure, we'll go with that. Now, as we mentioned before, producers also use this energy to carry out their life processes, and excess glucose is stored in the plant. Yeah, Alex, something like that. When other organisms eat the producer, some of the stored energy and some matter is transferred from the producer to the organism that ate it, which we call consumers. Now, these are also known as heterotrophs, which are basically the organisms which obtain energy by eating other organisms and then use that energy and the materials that are found in the food to grow, reproduce, and carry out all of their life activities. Heterotrophs must consume their food, hence the name consumer. Consumers can be further classified based on what they can eat or consume. No, Alex, not like that, but thanks for sharing. What I'm referring to is the type of food that organisms consume, such as eating producers or other consumers. Yes, you're right, Alex. Predators can also be prey, depending on what type of consumer they might be. For instance, fish act as predators when they're eating insects, but then they can actually become prey if they're getting eaten by a bear. As you can see, organisms depend on one another for energy, which is why the flow of energy is best illustrated using an energy pyramid, or a food chain, or a food web, which we're going to be discussing shortly. But first, let's start with the different energy levels or trophic levels that are found in a food chain, which are often illustrated on energy pyramids. No, Alex, those are not exactly the levels I'm referring to. I mean the different levels of energy transfer. For instance, we know that energy is originally obtained from the sun by autotrophs, which are also known as producers. They're basically the foundation of all food chains. They all begin with producers. Now, these producers are then consumed by herbivores, which are often referred to as primary consumers, because they are primarily obtaining their energy from producers. Yes, that's a great way to think of it, Alex. Primary consumers are the first organisms in a food chain to receive energy transfer from the producers. Now, just keep in mind that the arrows are actually illustrating the flow of energy. In other words, they're pointing to the organism that is obtaining the energy from the other, which is why the arrow is pointing from the producer to the primary consumer, because the energy is traveling in that direction. Okay, so what do you think it means when we say secondary consumer? Yes, Alex, correct. Secondary consumers receive an energy transfer from eating a primary consumer, meaning they are the second ones in line in that food chain after the producers. Yes, Alex, you're right. Tertiary are the third in line of a food chain after the producers. That means that they eat secondary consumers. Good question, Alex. We said that the primary consumers are herbivores because they eat producers, but we know that secondary consumers, as well as those that follow it, must consume another consumer, which means that they all must either be omnivores or carnivores. Great question, Alex. Energy pyramids describe the transfer of energy throughout a food chain, basically how energy is flowing from one trophic level to the next. No, Alex, we don't. In fact, there is a 10% rule which states that 90% of the energy obtained is used for the organism's own life functions, and some is released as heat, which means that once another organism consumes them, they're actually only transferring 10% of energy which was stored in their tissues. Yes, Alex, you're correct. Apex predators, which are the ones found at the top of the energy pyramids or food chains, obtain the least percentage of energy. That's because it doesn't end there, Alex. This is where scavengers and decomposers come in. Throughout the entire energy pyramid, decomposers like crabs, insects, fungi, bacteria, all of these break down dead organisms. Yeah, Alex, that's a good way to remember it. But just know that they are more than just a cleanup crew. They play a role in replenishing the soil with nutrients and minerals stored in dead organisms. Basically, they're recycling them back into the soil, which is why they play an important role in the carbon and nitrogen cycles. Great question, Alex. A food web basically describes the flow of energy and matter in an ecosystem. For instance, take a look at this food web. Notice there are a lot more arrows involved. The stability of an ecosystem relies on many different interactions within and among the populations that live there. In other words, there's an interdependence among all members of an ecosystem because they all depend on one another for their survival. Think of it this way. Plants obtain matter from the air, such as carbon dioxide. They obtain matter from the soil, such as water and other nutrients, and then they combine all of these to make living matter, such as the plant growing. Now, this is why we care whether or not carbon and nitrogen are replenished in the environment so that we can reuse for life once again. I guess if you think of it that way, Alex, it could be, but how about we try focusing on the carbon and nitrogen cycle? Let's first take a look at carbon, which primarily exists in the atmosphere as carbon dioxide. Now, carbon dioxide is available due to various sources. Yes, Alex, living organisms release carbon dioxide as a byproduct of cellular respiration, and it is also released when dead organisms and other organic materials are decomposing. Now, you also see carbon dioxide released from burning organic materials, such as fossil fuels, or from volcanic eruptions, and it's even released when limestone is heated when making cement. Now, the ocean water also releases dissolved carbon dioxide into the atmosphere when water temperature rises. No, Alex, because of human activities such as burning fossil fuels or producing concrete, we actually have increased the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere way too much. Sure, we should naturally have this gas in the environment because it not only serves a purpose for autotrophs, but it also acts as a greenhouse gas, which helps keep our planet warm. However, because we have increased the amount of this greenhouse gas so much, we don't have enough autotrophic organisms, especially because we keep cutting them down. That means that not enough carbon dioxide is used up through photosynthesis. So it's actually staying trapped in our atmosphere, contributing to global climate change. This is why we even dedicate planting trees on a special day of the year. Do you know which day that is? Yes, that's correct. So go out there and plant as many trees as you can on April 22nd, which is Earth Day. Consider the nitrogen cycle. For instance, a land plant takes in carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and other nutrients such as nitrogen and phosphorus from the soil to build molecules that make up its cells. Then, when an animal eats the plant, it uses those plant's molecules for energy and as building materials for its own cells, often rearranging those atoms and molecules into new forms. Now, when plants and animals carry out cellular respiration, which is where they're actually breaking down these molecules and releasing ATP, they're also releasing carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, like we just mentioned before. Now, similarly, when they excrete waste or die, their chemical compounds are often used as energy and building material by decomposers such as bacteria and fungi. Now, these decomposers release simple molecules back into the soil and atmosphere where they can be taken up once again by the producers. Yes, Alex, you're right. It is like the circle of life. There are times that ecosystems may even fall out of equilibrium due to these certain disturbances that may occur, such as hurricanes, forest fires, volcanic eruptions, or even human activities. Now, these events will sometimes cause major changes to plant and animal habitats. Now, a disturbance is basically any event that changes a community. You need to keep in mind, Alex, that every ecosystem may respond differently to the same type of disturbance. Now, some may recover rapidly while others take longer. or maybe never recover at all. Basically, the gradual regrowth of an area that has been affected by a disturbance is known as ecological succession. Now, there are two types of ecological succession: primary and secondary. First, take a look at primary succession, which takes place in an environment with a disturbance in which no living organism survived, and even worse, all the soil was removed. The lack of soil is a great way to identify primary succession. For instance, let's take a look at this example. Notice how the volcanic eruption destroyed everything, leaving behind only rock with no soil. Well, in time, pioneer species begin to appear. Now, these species can live in newly created, barren, or altered environments. In fact, they're actually the first ones to colonize an area during primary succession. The most common pioneer species is actually known as lichen. They begin to grow and break down rocks, which over time will provide a place for some plants to grow in the rocks and causes them to break down even further to make soil. Ultimately, when these plants die, they're going to be adding more nutrients to the soil. This is actually when life really begins to grow and thrive, in which trees and grass now start to grow, resulting in the migration of small animals that feed on these plants. Just keep in mind that the newly formed community will continue to change. Eventually, it's going to reach a point in which the biotic components of this ecosystem are diverse enough and have reached a stable population size in which enough abiotic components are available for them. In other words, a stable community has formed. We call this a climax community. No, Alex, secondary succession occurs when a disturbance is not as extreme as those seen in the primary succession because it does not remove the soil. Notice, in this example, the forest fire caused a big disturbance to all the organisms living in that area, but still, it left behind soil, which means that over time, grass and other plants can start to grow back, eventually leading to small trees and diversifying further, eventually leading to a climax community. Yes, Alex, great way to remember the two. Primary succession has no soil, meaning it has to start at step 1, which is to make soil. Secondary succession, on the other hand, still has soil, so it can start at step 2. Yeah, Alex, you're right. It may have taken the forest many years to recover from a forest fire, and then once it reached its climax community, you might think that it's done changing, but in fact, it's simply a long period of stability before a new disturbance comes along, such as deforestation or a hurricane or any other disturbance that may cause it to once again change. That's true. Some may say that our planet has a way of self-healing, but just keep in mind that the healing process takes time, and at times, depending on the severity, it may take lifetimes for it to heal due to human disturbances such as excessive hunting, deforestation, fires, overpopulation, and our biggest one of all, pollution. Our actions not only affect us, but numerous other species that are interconnected with us. Overall, ecosystems are subject to change, and the interactions seen among organisms as well as their environment may change as well, depending on their needs for survival. Okay, now that we've gone over ecology, you should be familiar with the following assessment standards from reporting category 5. This concludes our virtual biology camp lecture on ecology. I hope you enjoyed it, and that's it. Have a great one.
I just love